Hello, my friend. In this video, we are going to talk about the covenant of marriage, your intention for dating. And we're going to talk about the covenant of marriage with three kind of unique words. We're going to talk about marriage as a pillar, as a linchpin, and as a form of homeostasis. Kind of a little maybe random turn of events here you weren't expecting. But I'm actually going to talk about those in reverse order. So pillar, linchpin, and homeostasis. So let me start with homeostasis. And maybe that's already taken you back to your middle school biology days right now, which could be for some of you the last time you actually heard that word used. So what is homeostasis? Well, homeostasis is a condition of optimal functioning an optimal living for an organism that's based upon several different variables of the condition, environment, and nature of it. But homeostasis, simply put, is the condition for optimal functioning. And so why is that connected to the covenant of marriage? Well, because marriage, as the covenant of marriage as a type of relationship, is an establishment of one of homeostasis. It is the absolute best form of optimal functioning for the husband and wife within it, but also for the kids and the family that comes out of it. And not only that, but it's also a form of homeostasis for the community and society that surrounds it. In fact, you've heard people say that you can judge and evaluate the state of a society by the state of the marriages within it. When you have healthy, thriving marriages, then you end up with a healthy, thriving society. When you have struggling, suffering marriages, you end up with a struggling, suffering society because of the spillover effect that happens there. Is that in the God-honoring and God-intended form of marriage, you have the thriving of humans. It is absolutely the best way to raise children in the home with a loving husband and wife that are living out the biblical commands and the biblical vision for marriage. And when they do that, just naturally, even just to use the love verses from 1 Corinthians 13, just easily enough, that love is patient and love is kind. When you have that in a marriage, it's part of the elements of homeostasis. When you avoid, it is not boastful, proud, or rude. So when you avoid the boastful, proud, and rudeness in a marriage, that's part of the condition for optimal functioning. When you do not demand your own way, you do not keep a record of wrongs, that you forgive, that you extend grace and mercy, that you serve one another, that you are denying yourself of lustful thoughts of revenge and an eye for an eye mentality in marriage. When you actually are fulfilling the biblical calling in marriage, then it produces the state of optimal functioning for parenting, for relationally across between husband and wife. And when you do that, it raises healthy children. It's the best form of child development. And that then feeds into the community as you're growing people in that. Of course, you can still have that same institution and relationship of marriage, but when it is void of those positive biblical commands and it is filled with things that go against God's way, then it can become a major form of destruction. But that homeostasis we also see being played out for people, again, psychologically, physiologically, biologically, relationally, and beyond. So just one quick example of this optimal state of functioning for an example is that Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "You've heard it been said, thou shalt not kill." But if you've even just been angry or contemptuous with somebody, in terms of the Greek translation of it, is that there's the word rekah, which stands for empty-headed. And it is a saying and a way of expressing contempt. What is contempt? Again, not a word that you're super familiar with, perhaps. Contempt essentially looks like this. It's when people are boastful, proud, and rude. They're kind of looking down on the other person and treating them as if they're somehow inferior to them. When people are doing that and communicating contempt towards a person, he says, then you're subject to the same judgment as murder. Here's the crazy thing, is that 2,000 years later, we've got a psychologist by the name Dr. John Gottman. He is the foremost researcher on marriage and divorce. He was one of the first psychologists to be able to predict divorce with over 90% accuracy. And he tracked thousands of couples over decades of years to distinguish the difference between masters in relationships and disasters in relationships. And one of the things that he found was that in predicting divorce, he found what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And he says the number one predictor of divorce is contempt. He refers to contempt as sulfuric acid for love. And what's crazy enough is that he found that not only does it predict divorce, but also if you track the amount of contempt that somebody is receiving in their marriage relationship, you can actually predict the number of infectious illnesses that person will contract over the next 4 years. What happens is when you're on the receiving end of contempt, it produces the release of cortisol, which is the stress hormone in our brains, that's typically used for fight, flight, or freeze. And it's meant to just be used for extreme cases and kind of in and out of our system. But when you're on this slow drip and receiving end of contempt, it causes a slow drip and release of cortisol, and it leaves this stress hormone lingering in our bodies for too long. And what that does is that it then breaks down our immune system and makes us more susceptible to infectious illness. And crazy enough, he also found that those individuals and couples went on to live shorter lifespans than their counterparts. He referred to the two differences as the masters in relationships versus the disasters in relationships. The disasters had contempt. The masters had love and grace and mercy, kindness, goodness, peace, patience, the whole thing. And so we go back to Christ, what he said, that if you've heard it been said, thou shalt not murder, but if you've even just been angry or contemptuous with somebody, you're already subject to judgment. Why? Because when we are contemptuous towards people, we're literally slowly killing them from the inside out. So it's mind-blowing that the covenant of marriage, lived out in a biblical way, produces a state of homeostasis, optimal functioning for the two in it, the children, the family, the society, and the community beyond. It's crazy. So good. All right, so that is the homeostasis part of it. Linchpin aspect of the covenant of marriage is this. When we think of a linchpin, which you probably haven't in forever, but we're going to throw a picture up here of a linchpin. And again, on kind of the old time wagons, the linchpin was what held the whole thing together. It's what held together the wheel, the axle, and the carriage. Where all that met is that there was a linchpin put in place, and if it was pulled out, the wheel would come off, the thing would come crashing and scatter into parts. So that linchpin held it all together. Of course, in our modern day and age, we use, heavy duty nuts and bolts. So if you go to a NASCAR race, or you've seen that on TV with the pit crew, a lot of times when they have to replace the wheel, they're quickly taking off the nut, and then they're replacing the tire and putting that back on these bolts and securing it and locking it back in. But what would happen if one of those crew members forgot to put the nut back on, which is the modern day form of the linchpin, back on to the wheel? Well, eventually that person would drive off and that wheel would come flying off, put them into a spin, and go crashing and wreck the whole thing. That's marriage. When we lose marriage in our society, it's losing the linchpin. And very slowly but quickly, things begin to fall apart and deteriorate. Marriage is that important to society. So when people talk about marriage as this old-fashioned thing that's not really for today, that served its purpose but no longer does, they are not in touch with reality. They're not in touch with history. They're not in touch with interpersonal neurobiology. They're not in touch with psychology. They're not in touch with communication. It's just complete, and they're not in touch with sociology or anthropology for that matter. Because the question, and I think the thing that everybody has to decide for themselves is marriage, so think about marriage as a pillar. What's a pillar? A pillar is something that holds up the structure of a building. So is a pillar, and a lot of times pillars, when the structure has already come crumbling down, the pillars remain as a monument. In fact, this was the case at the University of Missouri, where I did my bachelor's and I did my PhD. One of the centerpieces of that Campus is what's called the quad, and it's where these 5 pillars stand, and it's where the first academic institution was originally built. The pillars were once load-bearing for the academic building. However, that later burned down and destroyed the building, but it left these pillars that are now simply just monuments. Well, unfortunately, that's how a lot of people think about marriage these days, as marriage is just this monument of a pillar that no longer serves a purpose. It's already come crashing down, and now it's just a monument to be thought of and written into the history books, and we no longer need it. Well, unfortunately for them, fortunately for all of us, is that the pillar of marriage is still very much load-bearing. Think about it this way. If you ever were to do a home renovation, sometimes people like to take out a wall here and there and open up a space. Well, anybody that's done home renovations realizes that you can't just take out whatever wall that you want, because some of those walls are load-bearing. And if you were to take out and wipe out that wall, you take out a load-bearing pillar that's holding up part of the structure of the roof to the foundation. So by removing that, you create chaos. Perhaps it doesn't come collapsing down right away, but you have severely weakened the entire structure. That's marriage. That's how important, how crucial it is, and why it's so important that we're taking time in these videos and in this module to break it down for you for why is it, and then it's in the next videos we're going to talk about what role does it specifically play that are perhaps unique things that you haven't thought about yet. But I want to end with this, because this comes from G.K. Chesterton, who wrote a book called The Thing in 1929, and he was talking about reformers and the 2 different types of reformers. He refers to the intelligent reformers versus the modern day reformers, and it is a very familiar reference to our current culture, even though this was written in 1929, where think about this with the institution of marriage, even as I read this. He goes on to say, at a portion of this particular essay, he says the modern type of reformer goes gallying up to it. Think about up to it as the institution of marriage, and says, I don't see the use of this. Let's clear it away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, if you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then when you come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. However, of course, that person will no longer desire to destroy it once they fully understand and wrap their mind around the usefulness and intentionality and history and future still to come of that very thing. So we got to be wise in our understanding of marriage. In fact, if you want to read a tremendous book that will go crazy in depth on this, is The Meaning of Marriage by Tim and Kathy Keller. Highly recommended. It's in the link and reference for it is in our resources at the end of this course. All right, I've got more for you in store in this next video where we'll break down this into a little bit more practical components for you. Hey, as a thank you for watching, liking, and subscribing, we got a free download just for you with a link in the description below. It's our 5 keys to successful dating cheat sheet. You're not going to want to miss these 5 critical components to attracting, dating, and marrying a godly spouse. So enjoy, God bless, and we'll see you in the next video.